I'm delighted to welcome Elif. Elif is world famous as a Turkish writer who writes her books in English. Her work brings together the modern and the mystical.
Thank you. I want to tell you a little bit about my past, my journey. You mentioned the words journeys, and I think that's such a crucial concept. I do believe that all of us are on a journey. Life is a journey, and it's open-ended, it's ongoing. And in that regard, maybe it doesn't matter as much where you arrive, as much as the act of moving, being on the move, constantly being ready to learn. And these are issues that matter to me a lot, especially in my writing. I'm a storyteller. This is the way how I connect with the universe. It's always through stories, through words. I was born in France, in Strasbourg actually. Shortly afterwards, my parents got separated and I came back to Turkey, to Ankara with my mother. So that was my first physical journey as a toddler. And my mom, at the time, she had dropped out of university in order to get married with my father, who was pursuing his degree in Strasbourg. So my mom had thought that love was enough, she wouldn't need anything else in life. She had fallen in love, and she had followed this man to France. So when the marriage collapsed, when she came back, she had no diploma, no career, no money, no other choice in life. And we ended up in a very conservative Muslim neighborhood, middle-class neighborhood in Ankara. This was the neighborhood of my grandmother. And these two women are very different, my mother and my grandmother. So when she came back as a divorcee, she was very young, she was 20 years old, the neighbors immediately wanted to find her a suitable husband because a single woman alone is seen as a threat in a very patriarchal world. So while they were busy trying to find her a potential husband, and of course that husband could be very much older than her because she was not very highly regarded now in the marital market. She was not a virgin anymore, she was a divorcee. While they were doing that, trying to arrange a marriage for her, it was my grandmother, my not well-educated, Eastern, very superstitious, very irrational grandmother who intervened and said, wait a minute, this is wrong. She needs to go back to university, my daughter. She should graduate, she should have a career, she should have a job, she should have choices in life. If she wants to get married afterwards, it's her choice. But what matters is that she should have choices. And in the meantime, she said, my grandma said, I'm going to take care of my grandchild. Okay, so this is exactly what happened. My mom went back to university, and I stayed with my maternal grandmother for many years. And my early years in life, I called my grandmother Anne, which in Turkish means mother, and I called my own mother Abla, which means big sister. So it was a bit confusing to everyone else, but very clear to me. And this was a magical world. I remember it very vividly. I think it did leave an impact on me because my grandma was a healer. People would come to her, people with skin diseases, people with psychological problems. They would come to her, and I watched her, drawing circles around the warts on people's hands, heal them in her own way. I listened to her. She was also a storyteller, an oral storyteller. And as I said, this is not a very well-educated woman. Her world was full of magic and irrationality. And I'm talking about late 1970s Turkey, when the country was going through enormous political turbulence. So there would be bombs exploding on the streets, people marching, people killing each other, ideological clashes. Outside of the house, all of this was happening, and inside the house, it was my grandma melting lead to ward off the evil eye, magical, beads, evil eye beads, and all of that superstitious world. And she would often talk about a mountain called Kaf. I don't know if you've heard of it, K-A-F. In the Islamic world, the mountain Kaf is supposed to be a magical place where things are possible, where there's pure equality, gender equality, race equality, class equality, and imagination rules. And I would always wonder, how can I go to that mountain Kaf? And she would tell me, you will have to find your own way, to that mountain. So this is how years passed. And then my mom graduated with flying colors. She became a diplomat. And I was zoomed from that very small environment into a very posh school, international school in Madrid, where I was the only Turk, where I was the only Turkish student. And I had to think more closely about the meaning of collective identity. What does it mean to have a national identity, to have a religious identity, to have a collective identity? Are we the identities we bear, or can we be just individuals, just ourselves? Yeah? So these are the questions that I had to think about in that school, because to be honest, it was not a very good time to be Turkish in an international school, and as you know, children can be a little bit cruel, can be a little bit harsh towards each other. It was a time when a Turkish terrorist had tried to kill the Pope. So when I would go to school, the other students would make fun of me. It was a time when Turkey would get 0 points in Eurovision Song Contests. So again, they would make fun of me. But I think what stayed most with me, throughout all these journeys was, first of all, I was a very lonely child. Yeah, books were my best friends. They still are my very good friends. And stories connected me to life. I thought my personal life was so boring. Yeah. And the world I found in Storyland was so vivid, was full of colors. I fell in love with the alphabet, with letters. Isn't it amazing that with a very limited number of letters, we can obtain unlimited, words and sentences? With very limited material, we create infinity. So I started writing stories, and that's how everything began. Not because I wanted to become a novelist, I didn't know such a thing was possible, but because I felt a need to write. I felt an almost existential need for stories. Afterwards, we came back to Ankara, to Turkey again. We went to Amman, Jordan, Germany, Cologne. My mom went to Japan, and I came to Istanbul on my own because I thought the city was calling me. There are things we do in life, and this is one of the themes that I want to talk about, if you'd like. We do without quite knowing why. We go to a new country, we go to a new city. Why are we exactly doing that? I think there are secular acts of faith in our lives. Faith is not necessarily a religious concept for me. It can be a very secular concept. So when you move to a new country, when you fall in love, you don't know who is this person. When you start writing a book, you don't know whether you will succeed or not. You really don't know what's going to happen 30 pages on, but you do it anyhow. It's an act of faith. So I think it was an act of faith that pushed me towards Istanbul. I love the city. I lived in that city for many, many years, and it plays a very important role in my writing. But I also felt suffocated by Istanbul as a writer, and I ran away from Istanbul. So I went to Boston, Michigan, Arizona, Tucson, of all places, where, believe it or not, there are so many mystics from all over the world. The desert taught me a lot, because I'm a big city person. I'd always seen the desert as a symbol of emptiness. And it was in Arizona that I learned it wasn't empty at all. And then I came back to Istanbul, and then I moved to London. So life has always been quite nomadic, physically, intellectually, and spiritually, always moving. And I think stories gave me a sense of continuity, a sense of center, yeah? And for me, when I look at my books, each and every one of them is so different. Not because I planned it that way, but because life brought those stories to me in that way. And by the time you finish a book, you change. You're not the same person anymore. Changes, transformations for me are very, very important. I think love is about transformation. If we are the same person before and after love, I really think we haven't loved enough. It's all about changing and allowing ourselves to be changed. So in that regard, I think love very much depends on freedom. If there's no freedom, there's no proper love. In that regard, love, I think, is in contradiction with possessiveness, which is a big problem because we say, my wife, my husband, my girlfriend, as if that person belongs to us. But it doesn't. He doesn't, or she doesn't. So it's against the nature of love to speak about possessiveness. Yeah. One of the people, I learned a lot from philosophers, from mystics. I am very much interested in mysticism, but this is a difficult subject to talk about, especially in a country as polarized as Turkey. Because in the land where I come from, people are either very religious or they're very modernist and they think, everything that's connected to faith is backward. And I've always longed to create a third path, one that appreciates secularism, one that is non-religious, but one that also understands the importance of faith and the importance of doubt equally at the same time. So this is how I approach it. For me, labels are not important. I am not a religious person. I am not even a believer, to be honest. But I'm someone who likes to ask questions, and maybe who appreciates questions even more than the answers. And to me, this is a big distinction. I think the job of a writer is to ask difficult questions about difficult issues. Not only stories, but also silences, taboos, political taboos, cultural taboos, sexual taboos, just to say, why is it like that? And then leave the answers to the readers. So it has to be a dialogue. Every novel, it has to have its doors open to the reader's views and to the reader's gaze. To me, it's amazing that thousands, sometimes millions of people can read the same book, but no two people will ever read the same book, Even if you share it with your wife, with your best friend, you won't be reading the same book because everyone's reading is as unique as our fingerprints. And I learned this when my first novel was published in Turkey. I received a very interesting letter from a reader. And it stayed with me. I've never forgotten it. She said, she talked about herself. She came from a very conservative family. She was wearing a headscarf. She said, I read your book. I loved it so much. And she analyzed the book better than any literary criticism that I've read to this day. And on the last page, she says, but you know what happened? I loved your book so much that I gave it to my best friend. She too comes from a conservative family. She too wears a headscarf. We are very similar. And throughout, we grew up together. I loved it so much, I gave it to her. And 2 days later, she came back. She put the book in front of me and she said, I hated this book. I could only read it until page 40. I think this is blasphemy. So this girl was very puzzled because for the first time, they had such a big difference of opinion with her very best friend. And she ended the letter by asking, did I get it right? Did she get it right? Who got it wrong? Asking my opinion. And in my opinion, there's no right and wrong, That's why I love art so much. That's why I love literature so much. Because it's a fluid world. It's based on water. So everybody's reading is very unique. But I believe one of the things that matter a lot is empathy. The word empathy is not something that we think about sufficiently in today's world. But I do know that a world that has no empathy in it is going to be a much more dangerous place, a much more violent place. So one of the aims of storytellers is to bring empathy on the table and just to say, can you please think about the story from a different person's angle? Can you try to look at it from a different window? And this is a mental exercise that I believe we should be repeating day in, day out. Just try to see from the point of view of another person, not only about events that are taking place today, but also events that have taken place in the past. One of my novels is called The Bastard of Istanbul. It's the story of an Armenian family and a Turkish family. And I try to do that in that book because in my country, this is a big taboo, the genocide, 1915. We never see it through the point of view of minorities. There's only one official historiography that's being taught at schools, and we internalize it. So I try to break that narrative into little pieces and ask micro questions. How would life be, for instance, for an Armenian silversmith? How would he experience? How would, a peasant would experience life? Just ask small questions about individual people. And that encouraged me to write this book. After the book was published, I was put on trial for insulting Turkishness. We have this article in our constitution. The reason I'm mentioning it is because it's very difficult to come with an alternative interpretation of history when people are not ready to hear alternative histories. But I think it's important to share stories, to say, look, maybe history is not a monolithic whole. Depending on who experienced it, there are different micro-realities. And this is an exercise that I think we should also be applying today. One of the things that worries me immensely is how we confuse the word knowledge and information and the word wisdom. These three things are very different things. So information is not the same as knowledge. Knowledge is not the same thing as wisdom. And the age we're living in is the age of information, but it's not necessarily the age of wisdom. Yeah? So it's very easy to obtain information about anything and everything. We can just Google it. But the problem is, as a result, we forgot to say, I don't know. You know, when was the last time we said, I don't know about anything? Because we don't have to say it anymore. We have a little bit of information about everything. But that's not the same thing as knowledge. And I think for wisdom, we need to go even a step further. I believe wisdom requires not only information and knowledge, but also emotional intelligence. And this is one thing that we need to cultivate. Emotional intelligence is very much belittled. Emotions are belittled. But emotions guide politics. We have seen it in America, we have seen it in Brexit, we're seeing it today across Europe. And I don't think overall people, you know, I'm a liberal, I believe in democracy, pluralistic democracy, but I'm also aware that people who are on the side of Democrats, liberals, we have not done a very good job in terms of connecting with people's emotions. Yeah? You can't belittle people's emotions. This is the age of anxiety. I think there's a lot of angst everywhere you go. And it's understandable to have anxiety because things are changing so fast. So you want to have something solid to hold on to. Then what can we do? First of all, I think never belittle anxiety. Connect with anxiety. And then hopefully try to find a better way forward together. But if we can't do that, I am afraid that we will be pushing people more and more towards more extremist views or towards more far-right views. If we can't connect with people's emotions, so not only their minds, but also their hearts. This is the job we need to do. All extremist ideologies, whether it's Islamic fundamentalism or the far right, they have one thing in common. They don't like multiplicity. They want things to be very simple, black and white. Are you one of us? Are you one of them? They say, okay, you're born a Muslim, then be a Muslim, be nothing else. Okay, they say you can only have one single identity. But this is against human nature because, again, we're made of water. We have many, many cells, many, many voices inside us. Multiplicity is in our nature. Yeah? We can have multiple belongings. I can be an Istanbulite. I can be a Londoner. People always ask me, where's home? And I always want to say, can it be homes, please? Can it be plural? Can it be homelands, please? So at the same time, I feel very attached to the Balkans, to the Mediterranean, to the Aegean. There's lots in my soul from the Middle East. I carry it with me. I'm a European by choice, by the values I share. At the same time, I'm a global soul, and I try to be a world citizen. So if we can all have multiple belongings, there's a bigger chance that your multiple belongings and my multiple belongings will overlap, and we will find a bigger common ground. But if we define each other on the basis of strictly defined identity politics, clashes will be inevitable. So these are the things that I worry about, I think about, I write about in my books. I also believe that just like the universe expands constantly, it is our job to expand our hearts, to expand our minds, and to be ready to hear voices that might not be the echoes of our own voice. Because in this life, if we're ever going to learn anything, it will be from people who are different from us. Someone who is exactly like me, who dresses up like me, who speaks like me, who has a very similar surname. Someone who is an echo of my voice has very little to teach me, and I have very little to teach that person. But someone who's different will challenge me, and I might challenge that person. So diversity is very important. It's tough. It's not an easy job, but it's precious. It's a treasure. And again, I come from a country that has never appreciated its cosmopolitanism. And I think by losing that cosmopolitan heritage, Turkey lost a lot. I'm not talking about economic loss or political loss only, but something in our conscience, we lost it. And I don't want the same mistake to be repeated in other parts of the world. So I'll leave you with that, if I may, but I would love to have your thoughts, your questions, and turn this into a dialogue together, please.
I really connect with what you said about multiplicity and we're part of an expanding universe. And the exciting thing for, I think, many people in this room, and you and me, is to continue to expand and to continue to push out those infinite edges. And yet, what I also see is, as you've just said, that there is a lot of single-mindedness in the world and that desire for things to be black and white. And there are probably times in our own lives when we've all experienced that. So part of me thinks, well, shouldn't part of us here who are able to expand, shouldn't we also learn to contract and actually learn to shrink right back down just for periods of time so we can connect with those people in society that are going to vote for the Trumps, are going to vote for Brexit because, as you say, there isn't that emotional connection. And if so, how do we do that? How can we do that authentically? Because to me, unless we do, we're going to continue, as you say, to polarize and live in an increasingly fragmented world.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's such a powerful question. It's a tough question, but I think it's so important more than ever today. We are being pulled in very different directions, completely opposite directions. So, and this was very unexpected, because when you read the writings of very intelligent people, intellectuals, scholars, journalists who wrote in throughout 1980s, 1990s, their expectation was we were all going to become a big global village. There would be no more national boundaries, because of finance, because of primarily economic interests, but also because of the flow of information. All of this would overcome religious differences and national differences. That did and did not happen. What they didn't expect was that globalization, yes, it did take place, but it also created lots of people who were worried about the consequences of globalizations. So the discontents, the unhappiness was very unexpected. So what's happening today is we're being pulled in two opposite directions. So on the one hand, there's the forces of nationalism, populism, xenophobia, a revival of religious values, especially in the Middle East. I see this a lot. A revival of misogyny, a patriarchal backlash. These things are all connected, pulling us in that direction. And what I call as tribalism, the idea that we all belong in tribes and every bird should fly with its own flock. This is the rising rhetoric today, and I'm afraid it's stronger than the second trend. We have to accept this reality. It's happening everywhere. Now we have the elections in France, in the Netherlands, in Austria. It's already very strong. In Turkey, the slide backwards has been tremendously fast. We have it in Hungary, in Poland. So wherever you look, this is happening. So what's the second trend? What's the opposite trend? Is people who believe, despite everything, in cosmopolitanism, in diversity, in the need for a new humanism, the need to revive humanism, in pluralistic democracy, our voices are now lower. So it's weaker, this energy. We have to see it. How can we strengthen the second energy? That's something that I ask myself. The first answer that I can give you is we have to stay away from dualities. In my opinion, and this is something I learned from maybe mysticism, and when I say mysticism, it's not only Islamic mysticism, Jewish mysticism, Christian mysticism. Mystics of all around the world have said very similar things. It's amazing. These people have never seen each other, but the things they said were very similar. So they would always talk about if you take part in a duality, the harsher you push something, the harder it will come and hit you back. It's like a physical law. We keep hitting, and then it keeps coming back and hitting us. We have to break the dualities. I'm giving you very maybe long answers, but with the same with religion, you know, this duality between absolute religiosity and absolute atheism is an artificial duality. We need to break it. I need doubt, because faith without doubt is dogma. Dogmas are very dangerous. But I also need faith as a human being. Can I not create another spiritual zone that's away from these absolute certainties? Can I not appreciate faith and doubt at the same time? So my desire is always to get out of dualistic formations. If we had been born in Detroit, we might have voted for Trump today. I mean, I'm very sad and very worried about the elections in America, but I can understand why people did it. We have to understand, and we have to come up with better solutions. So my second approach is emotional intelligence. We need to increase our emotional intelligence. Unfortunately, in a way, this is the age of post-truth. It is the age of post-fact. Facts in themselves are not enough to counterbalance this rising xenophobia and populism. Of course, we should talk about facts and information and knowledge, but we need something else, and that's emotional intelligence.
I completely agree that it's in our nature that we have to combine, even genetically, because combining the gene pool is just a fact, a biological fact. We become stronger and healthier the more mixed genes that we have. So that's even the case in animals. So mongrel dogs live a lot longer than pedigrees do. So, but something that comes up for me, and I've seen many times, is that when we have a lot of fear and we go from one extreme to the other, we get a lot of intolerance. Yeah. And then we get the other side of that, where we have to rise above that and we must be tolerant of others and give them a voice, etc. Yeah. But I find that sometimes it can be the case where we must question, are we being over-tolerant to the negative, that they have too much say, that we sit back for too long and for too often without standing up and not necessarily fighting with it, but saying that is one aspect of the truth, but it's not necessarily the whole truth, and you cannot make decisions and definitions on behalf of others. And I think that those of us who think that we may raise our vibration a little higher and rise above these things are actually sometimes just sitting on our duffs and not really accepting what is going on. And sometimes it's not okay to do that. And we have to stand up, not necessarily shout, but find a way to demonstrate that some things that are exclusive are not acceptable to everyone. We can have a voice, everyone can have a voice, but not necessarily those that shout the loudest are the ones who get the voice.
Absolutely, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I totally hear what you're saying. For me, I think it's very crucial to put back nuances into our discussions. We've lost nuances. One of the things that politicians do well is to simplify things. And politics divides. Religions also divide into us and them. And there's always the assumption that us is better than them. So instead of all those approaches, maybe to talk about nuances, to bring back nuances into discussions, but also to make room for individuality. Again, I come from a society that's very collectivistic. And if I may share this with you, as a writer, it always draws my attention. My readers are very diverse in Turkey, and among them there are lots of conservative women. And then when I talk to these people, I know publicly they're very xenophobic. And some of them are very homophobic. Not some of them, most of them are very homophobic, because Turkey is a very sexist country. But then they come to me and they say, I read your novel and I cried when that character, suffered or fell down. And the character they're talking about is maybe Armenian or Jewish or gay or bisexual or transsexual. So people whom they would normally in their daily lives reject in the public space, when they are alone reading a novel, these people become more ready to accept. And I always wondered, how does that happen? There is a difference between private space and public space. I do sincerely believe that energy circulates, that empathy is contagious, creativity is contagious. Depending on whom we socialize with, our energy changes all the time. It's not static. So if your friends are xenophobic, it's inevitable that you will be affected by that energy, and your energy will affect them. It's not a coincidence that fascism is a mass disease, you know? You need millions, you need thousands, you need multitudes for that, chanting together, and then populism increases. But when we are alone, something else happens to our soul. First of all, we stay away from that energy. We become relatively more ready to be open-minded, relatively more ready to be open-hearted, and we go back to inner space. So I do sincerely believe that we need to cultivate inner space. Most of our energy seeps outside because we're constantly rushing from one place to another. We have very little time to think about the inner space. If we can encourage individuality, you don't have to be a part of a collectivistic identity. This is something that I try to talk about a lot, especially in the Middle East, where there's no room for individualism. And then you are part of a national whole, or a religious whole, or an ethnic whole, and then you do what the others do. This is very dangerous. So we need to break that into little components and remind people that we are all individuals, we're all human beings, east and west, wherever we go. We have to stay away from certainty. You know, doubt is good, doubt is precious. We should always doubt ourselves. But I honestly think these are very difficult times for all of us. We have to be realistic, just as you said. It's not good to be over-optimistic. And I was reading this in a novel where the author said most of the people who survived the Holocaust in Germany were the pessimists because they left early enough. And the sentence made me stop and really think. Because we do know that if you are very pessimistic, it will ruin your soul, it will poison your soul, you know, you won't be a happy person. It's not good to be too pessimistic, but maybe it's not that good to be too optimistic either. So maybe we need, again, the dance of both, yeah? And Gramsci, the Italian thinker, he used to talk about the pessimism of the intellect and the optimism of the will. And I think this is what we need to do in this age. We have to see there's a rise in populism, dangerous rise in xenophobia, pessimism of the will, but at this, pessimism of the mind, but at the same time, the optimism of the will also be very necessary from now on.
I relate to a lot of what you say. I'm a British-born Indian. I've travelled the world. I've lived abroad. One of the things that I think about is identity, and I know that's come through the conversations you've just had. But I'm wondering, you know, is it important for us to belong? Is it important for us to have an identity? Because those things come from some sort of heritage or culture or nationality. But really, all of those questions are up in the air for me. And I'm just curious to know what you think, because there is a need to have a strong sense of self, of who you are.
Absolutely.
But my own conclusions is that does not now belong to any genre that's been created before. It's something I've got to create.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know what
Thank you so much.
you feel about that.
Thank you. I think it's so normal, understandable, and beautiful to have a need for identity. Of course, we're going to feel closer to our own family than to strangers. Of course, we will have emotional attachment to the town we grew up in, or the village where we grew up in. These things are very normal. All I'm saying is it shouldn't be our only identity. In addition to that, you might be British, you might be French, you might be Indian, other identities, if possible, belongings, because belongings is more plural in my dictionary, but maybe in yours, not necessarily. But what matters is to keep it plural. If we are only defined or solely defined on the basis of our national identity or religious identity or class identity, there's something wrong with that. And we talked about journeys, you know. Life is an effort for a transcendental journey. By birth, we're all given a self. We didn't choose this. We didn't choose the religion we were born in or the nationality we were born in. I didn't do anything for these things. For me, the things I worked for are more important because I really worked for those things. Does it make sense? So the desire to go beyond the self, which is again something that all mystics emphasized all around the world, this transcendental journey to be just to go beyond the boundaries of the self that was given to us by birth and by others. I think it's a precious effort.
If love is about transformation and freedom, how do you reconcile that with the notion of romantic love, marriage, and living an authentic life?
Yeah.
Sorry, that's a big question.
Thank you. No, it's a big question. I wish I knew the answer because I'm also learning and I'm also struggling. But one of the things that taught me a lot was this relationship between Shams of Tabriz and Rumi, which I try to write about in my novel. When they met, they were very different people. And it's a fascinating story. Rumi was very famous. He was at the top of his career. And Shams was a heterodox dervish who liked to challenge everything. He was a maverick. He was a heretic. And the love transformed Rumi from a scholar of Islam. He left everything aside. And he just became a poet who embraced the entire world equally. So I think just to get rid of our certainties, just to allow ourselves to be changed by the other person, and to accept that we are on this journey together. Nothing is for certain, and nothing is forever. You know, and sometimes I think, especially with the institution of marriage, we try to suppress this reality. You know, we think, oh, it's going to be forever. There's no such thing, not necessarily. We have to understand that realistically. Also, we expect too much from one person. Again, it's not realistic. We want that person to, you know, to be our match intellectually, sexually, socially, spiritually. Maybe we're going to have different forms of love. You know, because we always associate love with sexuality. We can't talk about these things even in our modern society. And I'm a writer. I care about words. Why is it that we have only one word, love, to define so many different experiences? You know, there are things you might prefer to share with your best friend rather than your wife. That doesn't mean that you don't like your wife or you don't love your wife. But there's something additional that you have with your best friend. So what I'm trying to understand is we really shouldn't be possessive. We shouldn't be unrealistic, and we shouldn't expect just one person to fulfill every single, you know, area of our lives. He can't do that, she can't do that, and we can't do that either. So we have different forms of love for our children, for our friends, for our ex-loves, for our partners. It's okay. Jealousy is a very poisonous, I think, feeling, and it goes hand in hand with possessiveness. I think it ruins people, and it pulls us down. Please.
The question I'd like to ask is, do you have questions that you find very difficult to answer yourself, and what would those be? And in the matter of love, which is what we're just addressed here, I always remember this phrase from Shakespeare, from King Lear: those who with best intention have incurred the worst. Could you reflect on that?
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's a tough question. As a writer, I don't like it when writers try to give answers in their work. I don't like it when writers try to teach something, you know. And again, in my country, we have a tradition of father novelists who have treated their readers as their sons, who have written with a mission, and who in a way situated themselves above their readers, thinking they knew more, they knew better, and then try to guide. I don't feel close to that approach at all. If you adopt that road, it's every novel is a bit like engineering. You put everything, every character there, you know what you're doing. Whereas when I write, I like to be a bit drunk. I like to not to know what I'm doing. I like to write with intuition and just ask questions. We're all equal. We're all creating the story together. You know, that approach to me is more important. So questions matter, but the answers we find together. With regards to, I hear what you're saying, but I also like this other saying, very ancient saying. It says you can't be great without being good. You know? It's very simple. We always want to be great in what we do. want to be, a great achiever, and I think it's okay to have ambitions as well. We shouldn't be ashamed of our ambitions. But can we be ambitious and good at the same time? It's a challenge. Because when you look around, so many people who have ambitions, unfortunately, have forgotten about goodness. And so many people who are so good, the salt of the earth, don't have ambitions. Is it possible to have this? I think dialectics is the core of life, the dance between opposites. When we try to suppress one side of the opposite, it's an artificial balance. It's better to understand that there's dialectics in life, and maybe what we need is, yes, we should be more ambitious, we should speak up louder, we should work harder, but we can't be great if we're not good at the same time. Thank you so much.